If you didn't see part 1 of Cancelled GameCube Games, make sure to go back and watch that video by clicking the link in the corner of the screen or the link in the description. Last time we touched on a few cancelled titles that Nintendo developed themselves or hope to publish, but there's still a few more to cover. As far as non-traditional approaches to controls go, Yoshi Touch N Go experienced something of a transformation during development. Yoshi Touch N Go originally started out as a puzzle platformer on GameCube, with Yoshi as the playable character protecting Baby Mario. However, around the same time the Yoshi GameCube title was in production, other developers at Nintendo were experimenting with the idea of drawing as an integral gameplay element. During E3 2004, Nintendo showcased this new drawing gameplay in a separate tech demo for the Nintendo DS called Balloon Trip. This demo featured players protecting Baby Mario, who was tied to balloons. The players had to draw lines of clouds in the sky to guide Baby Mario to safety. The demo was well received, so the decision was made to revamp the GameCube Yoshi title to feature this gameplay. Yoshi Touch N Go became a DS game, and the original puzzle platformer GameCube game was left behind. Another Nintendo title with experimental gameplay, Stage Debut, was announced at E3 in May of 2002 and intended for a 2004 release. Similar to Mario Artist's Talent Studio for the 64DD, in Stage Debut, players would take a picture of their face using the Game Boy Advance Game Eye. They would then be able to put their image on a 3D model and interact with the game's virtual world. Though an interesting concept with many applications, IGN noted at the time that there wasn't much to Stage Debut other than changing the actors and the scenarios. The game ended up indefinitely delayed, likely because the Game Eye was cancelled. Nevertheless, the game still made an impact. In a 2008 IGN interview, Shigeru Miyamoto said Stage Debut was an inspiration for the Wii's Mii channel. On top of this, Tomodachi Collection later reused some of the ideas planned for Stage Debut. In news that'll disappoint Earthbound/Mother fans everywhere, it recently came to light that there was a concept for an Earthbound sequel for GameCube that never got off the ground. In 2003, Yasuyuki Hone of Xenogear and Chrono Trigger fame had ideas for a GameCube sequel to Earthbound. Hone was able to pitch the project to Earthbound director Shigesato Itoi with the help of Satoru Iwata. Over the course of what was originally presented to Itoi as a lunch meeting, it slowly became apparent Iwata had arranged the meeting for the pitch. According to Hone, Itoi said, "Iwata, you arranged this, didn't you?" And the room went dead silent. Needless to say, Itoi wasn't interested in the sequel, but did praise the early game's crafted, fabric-based visual style. The pitch's ultimate failure can likely be attributed to the production of Mother 3, which lingered in development hell for almost a decade, but was revived for the GBA around this same time. While not a sequel, Factor 5's reboot of Pilot Wings was another game from a familiar franchise that ran into difficulty. The goal was an immersive open-world Pilot Wings game on the GameCube. Factor 5 experimented with head-tracking glasses that affected what was shown on screen in relation to the player's position, giving the illusion of depth within the display. Originally, the Pilot Wings reboot had a more serious tone, but it gradually shifted over development until it was more in line with the past Pilot Wing games. In time, development shifted to the Nintendo Wii, as Factor 5 later made the project its own IP. It went through the names Wii Flight, Wii Fly, and finally Wii Fly before ultimately being scrapped. Nintendo is nothing if not thorough, and appears to have wanted titles of all genres on the GameCube. Nintendo Pennant Chase Baseball seems to have been conceived after 2K Sports acquired exclusive rights to release the MLB games. The agreement halted EA Sports' MVP Baseball series, which had released the majority of its entries for the GameCube. This would have left a hole in Nintendo's sports gaming catalog. As such, Nintendo Pennant Chase Baseball was likely being made so the GameCube could have a baseball title. When 2K announced their MLB 2K6 would release on the GameCube, Pennant Chase Baseball was delayed and then ultimately cancelled, likely due to its redundancy. Of course, Nintendo isn't the only company making games for the GameCube, and they certainly don't have a monopoly on failed games. From never being greenlit to bankruptcies and legal issues, there are many reasons games fail. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse was a fairly unique game developed by 3DO. It would have had several playable characters, each with special weapons and unique abilities. Characters would have included a fallen priest and a young stripper. Stan Winston, who worked on practical effects for films like Jurassic Park, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and Aliens, would have been involved with the project. The game was essentially scrapped when the company went bankrupt in May 2003. In 2004, the game's creator Michael Mendheim said the IP was far from dead. However, nothing has been heard about the game since. Another interesting title was Sgt. Sergeant Cruz. While originally meant to release on PC in 2002, Sergeant Cruz was later announced for GameCube and Xbox as a Q1 2003 release. The game had an animated look similar to a Tex Avery cartoon. In it, the player starts out wearing only boxers. As they accrue clothing throughout the game, each new piece of Cruz's super armor gives him new abilities and artillery to fight the alien threat and save the world. Sergeant Cruz was meant to be a substantial game, with 30 missions across 15 stages, split-screen co-op, and a special mode where one player controlled the character's movement while the other controlled weapons, a surefire way to help siblings learn the value of cooperation. Then in the early 2000s, the game's developer Virgin Interactive went through a difficult period. The studio was eventually acquired by Titus Interactive, where it was rebranded Avalon Interactive. It was presumably during this time that Sergeant Cruz was cancelled. Monster Island was pitched in 2001 by Irrational Games as Rampage meets black and white creatures in a fully destructible environment. In it, players would take on the role of either a giant monster set on demolishing the city or the authorities who protected it. Monsters racked up points climbing skyscrapers and eating humans, while the authorities attempted to stop them using several archetypal characters with different abilities such as the scientist, the girl, the engineer, the general, and the hero. With a living city and dynamic elements, the pitch was ambitious. In the end, the project was never greenlit. As far as ambition goes, though, Flux would be hard to beat. Flux was an experimental action platformer first revealed in April 1998, with a planned release on GameCube and PC. According to the game's developers, it would have been the first game to offer varying planes of gravity. Flux also had a unique mechanic wherein the player rotated the world along 3 axes to move through it and control the action. The idea was that when flipped, guard towers would become bridges and water mills would cause floods. The game's developers, 8 Cylinder Studios, approached several large companies in an attempt to publish the game, but appeared to never reach a deal to actually fund and publish it. Fans of Creature Labs and the Creatures series might remember Project Loki, but not for the game itself. According to a rumor, hidden within the Creatures games was said to be a secret adventure mode. Originally started as a joke by developers, the secret adventure mode eventually turned into Project Loki, a Creatures concept for the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. Sadly, Creature Labs never found a publisher to fund development further than the initial prototype, and the game was scrapped. This wasn't the only game that didn't get far. L4-2 was a futuristic driving game being made around 1999 and 2000 for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. It was speculated to be a cyberpunk take on Driver. However, it's likely L4-2 never got past its concept phase, which is a shame. The game would have featured art by American designer and concept artist Sid Mead of Blade Runner and Tron fame. Another sci-fi-inspired title, Ion Runner, was a racing-on-rails shooter developed by Attention to Detail. 2 complete levels of the game were programmed and demonstrated to many publishers. Unfortunately, a deal wasn't reached before the company's funding was pulled, and in August 2003, production came to a halt. Many in the industry had seen Ion Runner's demos and were reportedly surprised the project was never finished. Though never officially announced, the arcade-like racer Stunt Pigs was discovered in 2014 when game collectors found its documents on a disc that previously belonged to M4 Ltd. While investigating, they found a game where players would drive around the city performing crazy stunts and collecting bonuses. According to a developer, Stunt Pigs was frantic and featured dark humor. It appears the game was canned when M4 failed to find a publisher. 12 Volt was also an arcade racer, first revealed in October 2004. The game was inspired by toy slot cars and would have been similar to Micro Machines. Players could race their tiny cars through houses and gardens. It was developed for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, but there was also a GBA version planned, which would have been fairly different. It's unknown why this project was never released and how much was completed before it was canned. Another racing title was Backstage. This title was developed by Cara and was first revealed in 2003. Players became scooter rider Zach as he whizzed around an LA-like city performing different tasks like deliveries, taxi rides, collections, races, and even photography, all in an attempt to break into the film industry. One of its main features was its sophisticated traffic system. Zach never got his big break, and the game never saw daylight. Some may remember a 1990 MS-DOS racing game named Stunt Driver, in which players made their own tracks and raced them, either alone or with AI opponents. At some point, a new Stunt Driver was planned planned for the GameCube, and was even one of the earliest games announced for the system. It was also planned for PS2, but both versions were cancelled. Yet another driving game was the deceptively titled Knights, which wasn't a medieval fantasy game, but rather a combat car title. Developed by Eden Games and planned to be published by Atari, Knights would have released on GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. However, in May 2002, Eden Games was sold to Infogrames, and Knights vanished without a trace. Doomsday Rescue was one of the more unique car combat concepts out there, starting off with a deadly asteroid shower hurtling towards Earth. Humanity's only hope is to relocate to Mars via rockets within 24 hours. Players are in charge of this effort, transporting scientists, doctors, politicians, and a few ordinary people through riots and disasters to the safe haven of the escape rockets. If the player accomplishes all of this, they too will be whisked away from Earth to start a new life on Mars. Doomsday Rescue was in development by Beyond Games in 2002, but was cancelled along with its other games, presumably because the company went bankrupt. Although the GameCube had some standout horror titles, it could have had even more. Nightmare Creatures 3 was a survival horror game developed by Callisto for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox in 2002. The game's original concept involved a heroine exploring 19th century Prague as a human during the day and merging with a raven to transform into a beast by night. As the beast, she would battle the monsters of her occultist nemesis, Adam Crowley. Ubisoft obtained publishing rights, but before the game could be finished, Callisto went out of business. Ubisoft then took over development. Reportedly, they threw out the previous concept and redesigned the game from the ground up. In 2004, an Ubisoft rep claimed the title hadn't been cancelled, but they've been quiet about the game ever since. Asylum was a first-person survival horror game being developed by Dark Black in 2002. Players would become a contestant in a TV game show that slowly transforms into a living nightmare. The game had its own physics engine that would bring destructible environments and ragdoll animations to the gameplay, complete with zombie limbs flying off when hit. Unfortunately, Dark Black struggled to find a publisher and ran into financial difficulty. It closed down and lost the rights to Asylum, presumably to Acclaim. It hasn't been heard of since. Crushed Baseball 2004 was a sports game with an over-the-top arcade style. It was scheduled for a March 2003 release, but was later cancelled due to BAM Entertainment being delisted from the NASDAQ in 2004. The game would have featured unusual characters with superhuman baseball-related abilities, and would have been released for GameCube and PS2. BAM went dormant in 2005, but a somewhat different GBA version was made by Kryptonite Games and published in 2004 by Summit Soft Entertainment. And then there was Extreme Pool. The game was developed for the GameCube, PS2, and PC. It was entirely finished, yet developers' graphics state for some reason struggled to find a publisher for it. It's a shame, as Extreme Pool featured a large set of background locations including an inner-city basketball court, a plane cruising at 30,000 feet, a Caribbean yacht, a city rooftop bar, and a Japanese garden. It had several modes, with some supporting 8 players at once. Another sports title was the boxing game by Climax, Title Defense. It boasted several technical achievements, including a full-on facial damage system and motion capture boxing animations that used 5,000 polygon models. It was inspired by Ready to Rumble Boxing and was planned to release on GameCube, PS2, Xbox, and PC. When it comes to other sports games, there unfortunately isn't much to be said about Ignition Entertainment's International Golf and Tennis. The title was announced for a May 15, 2005 release on both GameCube and PC, but when the date came around, the game was nowhere to be seen. NFL Quarterback Club 2003 was a licensed sports game being developed by Iguana Entertainment. It was meant to be published by Acclaim Entertainment, but never materialized. Some have speculated the game was cancelled due to EA's purchase of the NFL license. Upon closer investigation, however, EA didn't actually purchase the license until December 2004, which could point to other issues being involved. But there is one thing we know for sure. NFL Quarterback Club 2003 really did exist. One developer mentioned making a mini-game for the title on their LinkedIn. The action-adventure title, Lady Sia, was planned to get a GameCube sequel named Lady Sia 3D. The game's prototype was developed around 2002 and 2003 for the GameCube and PlayStation 2. It was a sequel to the original Lady Sia, which was released for the GBA in 2001. In 2003, its developer RFX Interactive closed down. The publisher, TDK Media Interactive, was acquired by Take-Two Interactive, thus putting an end to the project. Rather than a sequel, Extreme Force Grant City Anti-Crime was a third-person shooter spin-off of Namco's Dead to Rights games. It took place in the same city but had a heavy focus on stealthy gameplay. In Extreme Force, players assumed the role of an elite cop attempting to stop a terrorist plot before the events of the first Dead to Rights game. It was also known as Strike Force and First Strike Grant City Anti-Crime. After nearly a year of development, Namco canceled the game, citing time constraints as the reason. Picasso was a stealth thief title developed for the Dreamcast and first revealed in 2000. An extended development pushed it towards GameCube and PS2 instead. Despite this, only one playable build of the game is known to exist, with most of Picasso's gameplay ideas never implemented. Halfway through development, Picasso was radically changed. It shifted from its original idea into a stealth action hybrid in which two super rich people get into a bet about who could gather the most valuable art collection. The player assumed the role of a hired art thief competing against another thief to be the first to steal the art. Initial screenshots of the game show a male protagonist, though later screenshots show a female protagonist, indicating the main character may have been switched. However, Promethean designs went bust in the early 2000s and the game was cancelled. Ricochet Rick, meanwhile, was originally revealed as a GameCube exclusive in 2001. It was later also developed for the Xbox. Had it been released, players would have piloted the skies around legendary landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and the Great Wall of China. The project was cancelled early in development, likely because it was also developed by Titus Interactive. You see, Titus had another GameCube game that met with a terrible fate. Revealed in 2002, Tankers Smoking Barrels would have featured 6 different playable anime-style tank commandos in a futuristic Japanese setting. Players choose a character and set about smashing barricades, crushing army and police vehicles, destroying buildings, and generally causing chaos. But you could also free hostages, so really you're still a good guy. The game was meant to release in 2003, but never saw the light of day. Instead, Titus filed for bankruptcy on January 9, 2005, with $43.8 million of debt in tow. Don't Call Me Max was a fairly strange game that followed the story of Max, a kangaroo who runs away to join the circus his father once belonged to, only to discover it's been cursed by an evil ringmaster. Max must travel to magic realms to stop the ringmaster's curse, his only companion, a magical staff containing his father's spirit. This crazy game, developed by Prolific Publishing, never saw the light of day. But perhaps the most bizarre description of a game goes to Unity, which was described as a kaleidoscopic shooter. First revealed in 2003 to be published by Lionhead Studios, it was in development from early 2003 to late 2004 when its cancellation was officially announced. Both Jeff Minter, the game's developer, and Lionhead Studios cited the game's ambitious and experimental nature as the primary reason for the project's end. Peter Molyneux, Lionhead's co-founder, later added they believed the game wouldn't have finished on time. However, some of the game's technology may have later been reused for the game Space Giraffe on Xbox 360 and PC, so Unity may live on in some form. Speaking of long development times, Armada 2 Star Command was in development for so long it was originally meant to be a Dreamcast game. A 3D space shoot-'em-up, it eventually began being developed for the GameCube and PS2 under several names, including Armada's Revenge and simply Armada 2. After repeated delays and redesigns, and after working for 4 years on the game with limited resources, Armada 2 was laid to rest. The game Pickles, meanwhile, barely had a chance to get made. Pickles initially started as a way for Santa Cruz Games to test its developers' tools. The idea was to stack objects and characters without toppling them as enemies surrounded the tower and attacked in various ways. Pickles may evolve into Stackers, a similar demo that never developed further. Safari Joe: The Dark Continent was announced in April 2002 for GameCube and planned to be shown at E3. The game would have been published by Titus and was later revealed to be multi-platform. However, in early 2003, the game's website began directing users to Titus's website, the only hint to the fact Safari Joe: The Dark Continent was cancelled. In fact, many games seem to just vanish mysteriously. Trium Planeta was developed by F4 in the early 2000s. It was originally in development for the GameCube and PC, and seemed to take cues from games like Super Smash Bros. And Power Stone, with action-adventure overtones. Trium Planeta was ultimately cancelled in 2005. Another game by F4, Castle, was a real-time strategy tower defense game speculated to be a continuation of Pocket Castle, a previous F4 prototype. Castle Castle was never released. Street Kings was a 3-on-3 basketball game, developed and meant to be published by Konami. Players would have started out as a hobbyist basketball player, at length ascending to become an all-star. While it was announced in early 2003 for GameCube and PlayStation 2, it was quietly cancelled the same year for reasons unknown. The ill-fated Kid Ninja, Spirit of the Dragon, was developed by Asylum Entertainment, originally meant for release for the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox in 2003. The project was scrapped, but the game was later revived, this time for development for the Wii. This game, too, was scrapped, leaving the Spirit of the Dragon a simple ghost. Another cancellation was Savage Safari Hunt, a hunting game announced for GameCube, PS2, and PC in 2004. In it, players would explore African jungles where dinosaur-like monsters reigned. Players could hunt 20 beasts across 10 missions with 10 weapons and other survival gear. The game had a running prototype, but Savage Safari Hunt was mysteriously cancelled. Both developer Coresoft and publisher Crave Entertainment continued to make games for many years after the expected release in 2005, making this a bit of a mystery. Another game that would have been interesting to see was Dead Rush, which was announced at E3 2004 with a 2005 release date. In it, an amnesiac named Jake must discover why the town of Eastport is riddled with zombies after an earthquake destroys most of humanity. Rather ambitiously, the devs wanted the game to have only a single loading screen on boot up. Afterwards, it would never load again, meaning it would have had continuous gameplay without pauses. This is even more impressive as Jake would have been able to drive vehicles around town and make new ones out of parts. Perhaps it's less surprising then that Dead Rush was cancelled. Reportedly, it wasn't turning out how the developers hoped. Pterosaur: Dawn of Destruction was being developed for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox by Atomic Planet in 2003. In it, players took control of a pterosaur, leading other dinosaurs to safety as the world was ending. Players would learn about the different dinosaurs, figuring out which dinosaurs were the most vulnerable and how to go about saving them. Pterosaur: Dawn of Destruction was never released, for unknown reasons. It's likely Atomic Planet was unable to find a publisher for the game. On the 25th of February 2009, Atomic Planet went into administration and ultimately closed its doors. The developer Atomic Planet had 3 other games cancelled, all for unknown reasons. In development for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox in 2003, Nam: Tour of Duty was a first-person shooter where players took command of an entire platoon of soldiers. The game would have featured fierce battles diligently recreated from historic accounts of the 1968 Tet Offensive. Nam: Tour of Duty wasn't released and hasn't been heard of since. The second Atomic Planet game, Ace Squadron, was an on-rails shooter set in World War II. It featured various arcade-style air combat missions and was in development for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. It's unknown as to why the game was cancelled, but it's likely the screenshots shown from the game were pre-rendered mock-ups, implying the game didn't get too far in development. The third Atomic Planet game, Tornado Alley, was also in development around 2002 to 2003 for GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. In it, players would get to take control of a tornado, doing as much damage as possible to its surroundings while following the contours of the landscape, watching for thermals, and building the tornado's power with the proper blend of warm and cold air. It was planned for release in 2004, and similar to Nam: Tour of Duty, it isn't really known why it was cancelled. Atomic Planet wasn't the only studio facing issues, however. The previously mentioned studio Dark Black was working on Wreckin' Crew in 2002, which was described as a mix between Blast Corps, Power Stone, and Bomberman. Players would control a team of demolition experts whose goal was to accomplish their mission's tasks and destroy everything in their path while doing it. It would have been released on GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, but never surfaced. After the release of the cult classic Metal Arms: Glitch in the Systems, Swingin' Ape Studios began work on its sequel. Metal Arms 2 aimed to resolve the cliffhanger from the first game. However, work on the title ceased when Swingin' Ape were presented with an offer they couldn't refuse. They were contacted by Blizzard to work on StarCraft Ghost. As Swingin' Ape was a small team, they focused all their efforts on Ghost and ended up scrapping Metal Arms 2. StarCraft Ghost was meant to be a third-person shooter that let players walk through and experience the StarCraft universe firsthand. It was set 4 years after the conclusion of StarCraft Brood War and featured the character Nova investigating a military conspiracy. Not much is known about the game's storyline, but a novel named StarCraft Ghost Nova was released in 2006 covering Nova's backstory. The game was originally announced in 2002 to be developed by Nihilistic Software for the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2 before Swingin' Ape Studios took over development. Ghost's GameCube version was cancelled shortly after in 2005, and production on the game has been on indefinite hiatus since March 2006. Did you also know that a sequel to Super Mario 64 and a Pokemon RPG were planned for the N64 but cancelled? For more insight, watch our video on Cancelled N64 games.